About 143 years ago, the first Catholic church in Miles City was built. It had to serve a community of only 629 people, according to the 1880 census. But it was not really an incorporated town yet for another 5 years. It was merely a civilian add-on to the military base at Fort Keogh, next door. There were Catholics among the civilians who managed Miles City, and there were also Catholics among the soldiers stationed at Fort Keogh, and one man was responsible for all of their spiritual life, and that was Father E.W.J. Lindesmith, the official chaplain at Fort Keogh. He masterminded the building of the first Sacred Heart Church and served there for the first 10 years. There was a big spring flood in 1881, the year it was built, and Main Street became a canal. This became a pattern of recurring floods as late as 1944, when bombers had to come in and blast the ice packs to get the water moving in the Yellowstone River again. But back in 1881, they were just laying the foundations for the church when the flood happened. And so they took care to make sure that the foundations were high enough to survive future floods. As Miles City grew in the civilian population and shrank in military population until eventually Fort Keogh was closed, until the first pastor arrived in 1887, Father Cyril Poelin from Belgium, the first priest ordained in Montana. He served 2 terms in Miles City, stretching in all from 1887 to 1901, a period of 14 years, which were times of great growth for the city. Let's look at Miles City's early life through the eyes of an incoming school teacher. Catherine Edith Conway arrived at the station dressed to kill and was met by her sister Mamie, also dressed to kill. Everybody seemed to dress up to ride the train and even dress up to go meet people who were arriving by train. It was more of a dress-up society in 1909 than it is now 110 years later. Catherine liked Montana and got a teaching job here, and she liked one of the young fellows who was homesteading in Montana at the time, and ended up marrying him on the 10th of May, 1913. They presented themselves into the studios of Huffman in Miles City and had their pictures taken. Catherine with her matron of honor, Edith Lavinia, and George Ambrose, her fiancé, having his picture taken with his best man, Hugo Gabbers. They did not take a picture of Catherine and George together. Perhaps they were not allowed to look at each other in that strange custom around marriage in America. It ended up, however, that I could Photoshop them together and create a portrait of the 2 of them for the purposes of this video. He looks a little scared, but willing. She looks more than determined, and she has him wrapped around her little finger for the rest of her life. After the ceremony was over, Father J.J. O'Carroll went to the sacramental registry and wrote in his own hand, "The Feheli Conway Wedding." While Father was making the record that I would photocopy many, many years later, the couple took off on their honeymoon. George had a job watering the locomotives at Sanders, Montana that occasionally stopped there. And as a result, he had a pass that allowed him to travel on any railroad in the United States, along with his wife. So they went on an extended honeymoon trip. They went to his family in Butte, they went to her family in Missouri, and then they went to Pikes Peak in Colorado just for the fun of it. Here's a group photo of all the people taking the pleasure trip up to Pikes Peak, altitude 14,147 feet, it says there. Arriving there 8 days after the wedding on May 18th, 1913. Here's George Feely with his bride, wearing his bowler hat. The Derby was favored both by lawmen like Bat Masterson in 1877 and also by outlaws like Butch Cassidy in 1900. While the couple, George and Kate, were in Missouri, they visited Sister Mary Baptista Conway, the bride's sister, at the convent in Conception, Missouri. Miles City had religious women too. The Ursuline sisters maintain an academy for boarding and day students in their 1902 convent building. And the Presentation Sisters of Aberdeen, South Dakota managed Holy Rosary Hospital, built in 1910. When their honeymoon was over, George and Kate returned to Sanders, Montana to begin making a home together. The following year was big for Montana. On the ballot in November 1914 was a constitutional amendment to grant women full voting rights. The yellow counties had at least 50% in favor. Among them are Custer County, Miles City, and Rosebud County, where George and Kate settled. And the amendment passed 53 to 47%. And as a result, Kate, who never expected to vote in her life, because most American women couldn't, found herself able to vote in the election of 1916, where a woman was on the ticket running for Congress. I know that Kate voted because she was very proud to be able to vote, but I also know that she voted for this woman, and not just because she was a woman, but because both of them were Republicans. Kate had been raised in a Republican home in Missouri. Well, lo and behold, Jeanette Rankin got elected, and she actually became the first woman ever to enter the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., as the representative of any state. And she took her seat in an otherwise all-male House of Representatives. She was the darling at the annual woman suffrage procession in Washington, D.C. Standing beside her in the open car is Carrie Chapman Catt, president of the National Woman Suffrage Association. They arrived at Suffrage Hall, the headquarters of the association, where Congresswoman Jeanette Rankin received the accolades of the participants in the parade. Every woman in America was saying, "Montana elected the first woman to Congress." Many men in the country were saying, "Montana elected the first woman to Congress." In Miles City, Montana, the women and men were saying, "We Montanans elected the first woman to Congress." And Kate Feely said, "I got to Montana just in time to be able to vote for the first woman in Congress." In 1985, the state of Montana commissioned a bronze statue of Jeanette Rankin and donated it to the Emancipation Hall of the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center in Washington, D.C., with a duplicate placed in the Capitol building in Helena, Montana. I don't like the statue. She's wearing a house dress. She never wore that to any of she always had a scarf. She had some kind of fancy display because she had a presence, a persona that was not that of a beaten, humble housewife. She's bareheaded, but she always wore hats in public. The women who came to Sacred Heart Church in Miles City, Montana, humble though it was, dressed up. They voted a woman into Congress who knew how to dress up, and they were proud to have put her there. Women of Wyoming and Montana could say, "We achieved equality here first." And as a result, women's organizations in the parishes became very strong. And the spirit of Jeanette Rankin is found there in the altar societies and councils of Catholic women that have flourished both in the old Sacred Heart Church and in the new Sacred Heart Church in Miles City. Father O'Carroll got to build the new church and offer Mass in it, and we will say more about the new church in a coming video. See you then.